So you've bought yourself a camera and you've been going around and shooting anything and everything so you can learn how to use it, and you've got loads of different images now of lots of different subjects, and some of them you like and some of them you don't like, and you've gone online and watched numerous tutorials to try and build up a good skill set so that you can take better images in each of those different areas. And all of that is well and good. It's how you learn. But you've now hit that stage where you realize that there's a much bigger puzzle to solve and you can't put it off any longer. And that is, what are you going to point this camera and these skills at? It's time to pick a direction for your work. And that's why I chose to make this film with Rachael Talibart. I met Rachael through our mutual friend Simon Baxter, and after hearing a little bit of her story and looking at her images, it was clear that this was somebody who took her time to work out a very specific focus for her photography that she now regularly receives critical acclaim for in her work, but also creatively fulfills her and constantly energizes her to keep shooting. As you'll hear, that meant leaving a very high-powered job in the city and trying to explore lots of different genres of photography to work out which way she wanted to do, all the while trying to bring up young children and balance a busy family life, until that day that the penny dropped and she found her niche and started to plug away. And that's why I think Rachael's story is one that speaks to all of us who are looking for that specific direction for our photography. And you'll notice I said us because I include myself in that. So I'm going to keep this short, partly because I'm sure you can hear I'm losing my voice. I'm coming off quite a bad week of flu, but mostly because I want you to spend a good amount of time with Rachael's story and her work. And in her story, I hope you discover somebody who went through a process herself and did it patiently to work out what she wanted to photograph that would fulfill her and reach other people. And that will get you thinking about your direction, your niche, the project you need to be shooting, the subject matter you need to be shooting, the focus you need to put into your photography that will both enrich you creatively, but also reach and connect with other people where they're at. So I'm going to shut up now. Here's Rachael Talibart.
My connection with the sea goes right back to my earliest childhood. I grew up on the West Sussex coast, and in fact in Bognor Regis to be precise. Perhaps not one of the most instantly famous places on the coast, but my dad was a keen yachtsman, and sailing was something we did all the time. Every weekend that I can remember as a child, and pretty well all of the school holidays were spent at sea. Unfortunately, as some people may know, I was and remain a bad sailor. I can get travel sick on the London Underground. So I was quite relieved when I was about 12 or 13, Dad gave up long distance sailing. But I think those years did give me something special. They gave me a lifelong fascination with the ocean. A lot of it has to do with, I think, the fact that I was seasick, because as anyone who suffers from that awful malady knows, you really have to stay on deck. You can't go down below. That makes it so much worse. So on long sea crossings, I had no choice but to stay on deck. Can't read. Anyone who's been car sick knows that. So I had to just look out. And I used to look at the sea because there wasn't anything else to look at, frankly, the occasional lighthouse, but otherwise nothing. And I used to, all kids are imaginative, I was the same. I used to imagine mountainscapes in the waves. I used to imagine monsters or creatures reaching out. I used to tell stories to myself. So as an adult, I would always prefer to go on holiday to a coastal location. Never been very good at sunbathing, so I would prefer to go somewhere misty with driftwood and rough seas rather than somewhere sunny and colourful. And that's definitely very much the theme of my work now. So my first career was as a solicitor in the City of London, and the reason I got into that was because when you're 17 and you're filling in the UCAS form, as it then was, I think, or UCA, you are not old enough to make a good decision. And I was very much, I'm going to be this successful businesswoman and, everything that I probably wasn't suited to being at that stage. And decided to do law because everyone was telling me to do English literature. So I went to university, Southampton University, to do an LLB, and about a week in, I realised I'd made a terrible mistake. And I spoke to the English literature department, and they said, yeah, sure, you can come, but actually loads of lawyers have realised before you that they've made a terrible mistake, and we're full, but you can come back next year. And my parents said to me, well, why don't you wait until Christmas and see? And so I stuck it out. And of course, by Christmas, I'd got a social life. I'd made loads of friends and I was fully embroiled in that side of uni. And I decided to stick it out. And then I stuck it out for another 20-something years. The day I realised that I really shouldn't be sitting in a law firm was actually through my best friend, Catherine. And one day I popped into her office to say hi, as I did, and she was sitting behind a desk looking all shiny and bright and happy. And I said, oh, you're in good form today. What's up? She said, oh, I've got a new case. We actually used to call them matters. So I've got a new matter. And I'm going to have to work really, really hard. And it's going to be really, really hard. And I'm going to prove to everybody that I can rise to the challenge. And it's going to be brilliant. And I thought, oh, good for you. And I went away and sat at my desk and thought, oh no. When I get a new matter, I think, oh no, it's going to be really, really hard. I'm going to have to work really, really hard. Everyone's going to realise that I'm actually no good at this and it's going to be a complete disaster. Now, actually, I'd been doing really well. I'd been promoted ahead of some of my peers so I wasn't really rubbish at it. But the fact that I felt that way showed me that this career was not going to lead to lifelong happiness. And that was when I started to think about alternatives. And actually the decision to become a photographer happened in Venice, of all places. I'd gone to Venice on a masterclass with Michael Levin, who some people may know is a successful Canadian fine art photographer. And he was doing a masterclass in Venice, which involved a lot of sort of classroom time with him and also opportunities to go out and shoot. And on the last morning, we had fog. Now, I love Venice. I've been to Venice 6 times. I will hopefully go many more. But never, ever have I been lucky enough to have fog until that final morning. And I looked out of the window before sunrise, as we do, photographers, and saw fog. Yippee, I thought, grabbed my gear and rushed out. And there was a group of photographers and they were photographing gondolas in the mist, which is an obvious and rather nice thing to do, but standing with them, I just felt awkward. I think it was partly the knowledge that probably whatever I would do would look a lot like what they were doing, and I hate that. So knowing Venice very well by now, 6 visits, I poodled off on my own to a quiet corner that no one would consider worth standing to make photos. And I made a picture there called 5. It's not about Venice at all. It's 5 of those sort of mooring posts that you have in the Venetian lagoon. And it's just a photo really that I hope expresses not location, but how I felt about being there in that moment. Because in that moment I made my decision that I was going to see if I could make it as a full-time photographer. And I made that decision standing there in that beautiful moment before sunrise, in absolute quiet, slack tide, top of the tide, fog, no tourists, no vaporettos, no gondoliers. It was really peaceful, and it gave me space. And there's lots of space in the picture as well. Gave me space to make the decision, and I immediately felt a tremendous sense of relief. Well, when I was in Venice on the masterclass with Michael Levin, that was organised by Jonathan Critchley, another well-known fine art photographer with the sort of black and white style. And Jonathan offers a distance learning or mentoring kind of arrangement. And when I came back, having made this big decision that I wanted to go for it as a fine art photographer, I decided to invest, because it was expensive, but you get what you pay for with these things. I decided to invest in Jonathan's mentoring scheme. And he came and we had a chat in this house about what I wanted to do. And he then started the whole thing with a questionnaire. A lot of the questionnaire was quite weird. It had questions in it that were unexpected. Anyway, the big question, I suppose, on this questionnaire was he asked me to imagine myself somewhere where I felt very contented to be completely on my own. And I was there with my camera in this space, but I was alone and I was very, very content. And I was to describe that place to him, and maybe slightly oddly, also describe what I was drinking. So he said, don't think too long about it, just go for it. And the first thing that occurred to me was what I wrote down, which was that I was on a promontory out on the coast into the ocean, looking down, and on one side in the lee of the promontory where there was no wind, there was a beautiful calm sandy beach with lovely calm sea. And on the other side, where the wind was, there were rocks and big crashing waves. And on the drink question, I said, well, if it's fantasy, I'm having a margarita. But if it's reality, it's probably water. And he said, well, why are you photographing anything else? You obviously need to be working at the coast. Which sounds obvious. But at that point, back in 2014-15, I did very little coastal photography. And that was largely logistics driven, because I was raising a family in Surrey, inside the M25 as well, not sort of South Surrey. And, you know, you can't just head to the coast for sunrise and sunset if you're raising a young family. You've got other demands on your time, and I didn't resent them, my goodness. You know, the most important thing I've done with my life is raise kids. But anyway, Jonathan's question was great, because it showed me actually what I really wanted to be doing. And the timing was fortuitous, because by now my youngest was 13 or 14, and she needed me a lot less, and my son is older. So this was a wonderful opportunity, and everything just came together. And I basically gave up photographing all the other things and just started going to the coast. And I haven't stopped since. I guess my typical photography day begins actually long before the day, in that I do have, like everybody, I have a busy life. You know, I'm running workshops, I've got a lot of admin, I'm writing, I'm preparing talks, and I've still got a family and a household and a husband and all of those other things. So I think for me it's really worked to diarise photography days, which does sound rather lacking in spontaneity. But the reality is, if you don't do that, or at least if I don't do that, I'm probably not going to get out very often. A lot of professional photographers complain that it's come at the cost of their own photography. They don't make time for that. So I have to diarise it. Now, the important thing is, once I've done that, if the forecast for that day is then terrible, I go anyway. Forecasts are endlessly wrong, especially at the coast actually. To be fair, it's really impossible to predict coastal weather accurately. And you've just got to go. And anyway, sometimes the worst weather and the worst light makes you more creative. So planning a day, and then on the day, getting up, if I possibly can, if it's not the middle of the summer when frankly, when I've got an hour and a half drive as well, I don't do dawn. But the rest of the year I might try and get down for sunrise, just because in this busy south coast where I work, that's your best shot at an empty beach. And I really do like being alone when I make my pictures. So I will get up early, head down to the beach, and then I just don't put myself under any pressure. There is no pressure to get a portfolio picture. I've tried to work like that and it's a disaster. As soon as that's there in your head, it's messing with your head and you're not going to relax, and you're certainly not going to experiment. And experimenting is really important to me. So I'll go down to somewhere I know really, really well. I love going back to places, and I will just spend all day there. Sometimes I can sit on the beach all day, watch the tide through a whole cycle, maybe wave at a friendly seal, and then obviously chat to the odd dog walker, and make not many pictures because the light's terrible. Sometimes I will just be really, really busy all day and make far too many pictures and come back with very full memory cards and a job on my hands. So that's how I'd spend the day. And then when the day is over, the light is over, come back home, and I then put those memory cards aside. And I don't look at them. If I can avoid it, I don't look at them for weeks. I've got a queue actually on my desk upstairs. I think I've got 15 memory cards waiting to be uploaded. This is really important for me. Now, this is just how I work. Everyone's different, right? So some people, it has to be much more spontaneous and quick. For me, I've learned that I get very, very excited when I'm out at the coast with the sea, and I just love making photographs there. I love it too much. And when I get back, I'm still tripping from that wonderful experience. And sometimes, if it's been really good, I may be tripping for a very long time. And I am in absolutely no position to assess the photographs. First off, if I look at them too quickly, I'm almost always disappointed because I'm still tripping. No, my photos can be great, but they're never going to match up to the high that I'm on. So that's a disaster. I want to avoid that. And the other thing is that I'm absolutely unable objectively to edit those photos. So for me, there needs to be a gap. And then I can come to the pictures and I'll upload the memory card, and I'll probably pick 2 or 3 pictures from that. I really don't delete much at that point. If they're completely out of focus, or you started a long exposure and then changed your mind and switched off the camera and you've got a black rectangle, then I'll delete those. But the rest I will leave, which is why I have to have a very big hard drive. But storage is quite cheap these days. And I strongly think that our aesthetics develop over time. And there are certainly pictures in my portfolio that I can think of that I didn't find for 6 months, a year, 2 years, because I was looking for something different. When I first reviewed them, I was looking for something. I had a preconception in my mind of what I wanted from the day. 2 years later, I go back, I've forgotten all of that. And now suddenly I might see something different in a picture. So if you can, I would generally recommend delete as little as possible, just the real disasters. The job's not done when I've finished editing a picture. The next stage is to print it. So if I think, right, this is the edit, this picture's done, then I print it. I've got an A2 printer in my studio. I'll run off a print on the fine art paper of my choice. I have a range of papers that I know I like. And I will then stick it on the wall of my studio. And I will come and go in my studio every day over a period, days, weeks, occasionally months, and I will live with that picture. It's amazing what you notice actually once you've printed a picture. I mean, the obvious thing, that awful dust spot, the dust bunny that despite your careful scrutiny at 1:1, you've missed it. But there can be other things, a little detail on the margin that drags the eye away from where you want it to be, or you don't quite like the colour there, or the tones, whatever. If I find something like that, which is quite common, I will then re-edit to deal with it, print it again, same process. If a picture's withstood that sort of scrutiny, then it's ready to be published. And so by publish, I include social media. So I'm not going to be throwing pictures up on, for me, Instagram's my main account, not throwing up pictures on there just because I need a new picture. I don't think you always need a new picture. If your followers change, anyone who looks will see followers change constantly. So after 6 months, I figure it's fair to post a picture again anyway. What I don't want to be doing, I think it's far more damaging to be posting stuff that I then look back on later and think, oh, cringe, than to be posting stuff that I posted 6 months ago. So my Instagram is a much slower burn, if you like. I'm not diarising the life of a jobbing landscape photographer. They're portfolio pictures that have withstood scrutiny, and it's just how I work, and I think it works for me. I often get people say to me things like, I'd love to do what you do, what advice can you give? It's all right for you, sometimes people say, but I have a day job, I have a young family, or I have other commitments. In reality, there are always going to be reasons why it's hard for all of us. I have a 90-year-old father that I need to spend time with. I have done this with younger children. I have all sorts of other things going on in my life that are private. We all have stuff. That's the reality of it all. I think don't put yourself under too much pressure here. I think part of the reason it starts to seem really hard is because people set themselves unrealistic goals, unfair goals. They're not being kind to themselves. Let it happen slowly. Let it happen organically. Don't just give up the day job and say, right, yesterday I was whatever your job is, today I am a full-time professional photographer. You're going to be really lucky if that works for you. I'd be amazed, frankly. For me, it happened really, really slowly. So although I talk about the sort of epiphany, if you like, the epiphany of being in Venice and deciding to become a photographer, that was a really slow process in reality behind the scenes. It had been a passion and a hobby all through my city years as a lawyer. Took a bit of a pause when the camera bag became a nappy bag, but then started to come back. And as I said, I was photographing what was available to me within my lifestyle. I'm going to be honest, it's easier for me at the stage of life that I'm at than it would be if you were in your 20s. I have had another career, a pretty well-paid one. So I'm on a solid financial footing. It's sordid maybe to talk about money, but that is the reality. And photographers need to pay the bills. So, I now earn more than enough that I could live on very comfortably, but it didn't happen overnight. And I didn't take a massive leap into the dark. So, just be kind to yourself. If you want it, it can happen, but let it happen slowly. You maybe need a bit of life experience behind you if you're in your 20s. How are you going to know what your own voice is yet? You don't even know what you like yet, So just go out and live and do the day job and use your holidays and your weekends to enjoy photography if you can. And if you can't do that because of family commitments, maybe you've got half an hour. Nip outside, find something to photograph and just enjoy it. And that will make you a good photographer over time.